My parents spent their whole lives building a dream, and when they retired, that dream took shape. A modern villa perched on a secluded hill deep in the forests of Oregon, surrounded by a forest of ancient fir trees hundreds of years old. The house was an architectural masterpiece with enormous glass walls instead of concrete, designed to capture the majestic mountain scenery. It was beautiful, luxurious, and peaceful. But it was also a perfect glass cage. I was 17 at the time. My name is Ethan. I wasn't thrilled about moving to the middle of nowhere, far from my friends, far from the city. But I had to admit, the place had a haunting beauty, and I could invite my girlfriend, Sarah, up for the weekends. The first time it happened, Sarah was there. That night, my parents had gone into the nearby town for dinner. We were watching a movie in the basement media room, a soundproof space with a home theater. Everything was normal until I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine, a primal instinctual urge to flee. My heart pounded. I kept glancing towards the large glass window behind me, even though there was nothing outside but pitch-black darkness. "What's wrong, Ethan?" Sarah noticed my restlessness. "Nothing." I tried to act casual. "Just an intense movie, I guess." But I knew that wasn't it. The feeling of being watched was so palpable I could almost feel a pair of eyes burning into the back of my neck. After seeing Sarah off, I went around turning off the lights. As I passed through the ground floor living room, my eyes casually glanced out the giant sliding glass door that faced the backyard. And that's when I saw him. He was standing right at the edge of the forest, almost blending into the shadows. A gaunt-looking man with shaggy hair, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt, but the thing that made my blood run cold was his face. In the dim light from the porch, I saw he was sporting a grin that stretched from ear to ear. A vacant, insane grin. His eyes were wide, staring right at me. And in his hand, he held a small hatchet, the kind hikers use. He did nothing, just stood there, smiling and watching me through the glass. I was frozen on the spot. Then I slowly backed away, ran upstairs, and locked my bedroom door. Just then, my parents got home. I told them everything in a panic. My dad, a retired engineer, was skeptical but still called the sheriff's office. My mom, however, turned pale. That night, my mom came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, her voice a whisper. "Ethan, this land has old stories. The locals sometimes talk about the Watcher on the Ridge. They say decades ago, a homesteader's family vanished on this very mountain during a harsh winter. He survived, but lost his mind. Since then, people say they've seen his ghost wandering the woods like a wild animal. They say he still thinks this territory is his, and he watches any new family that builds on his sorrow." Her story scared me even more than the man himself. The person I saw wasn't some random drunk. He was a part of these woods, and he was watching us. The weeks that followed were a campaign of psychological terror. Almost every night, I would hear a faint tapping on the glass downstairs, very light but rhythmic. I swore that on some nights I heard footsteps on the roof. I told my dad, but he thought I was becoming obsessed. Only Sarah believed me. "Maybe you should ask your parents to come back to the city for a while," she said worriedly over the phone. But I couldn't leave my parents alone. The feeling of being isolated in my own home was terrifying. Then winter came. The first snow covered the forest in a blanket of white, turning the landscape into a fairy tale. But to me, it only made things scarier. My parents went into town again to stock up on supplies. I was home alone with Max, our German shepherd. Max is a smart and gentle dog. He almost never barks. That afternoon, as the snow fell heavily, Max suddenly shot to his feet. He stared intently out the main glass door, his ears perked, and began to growl. A deep, threatening sound I had never heard from him before. Then he started barking, a frantic, ferocious, non-stop barrage. I stayed silent, my heart hammering. I knew someone was out there. Then came the knock. Slow, hollow, and taunting. I didn't answer. That night, I slept on the sofa with Max, the shotgun my dad had taught me how to use right beside me. The next morning, I stepped outside and felt my stomach clench. On the pristine white snow were human footprints. They formed a perfect circle around the entire house. They stopped at every single glass wall as if the person had stood at each one, patiently looking inside, searching for me. Things came to a head one weekend night soon after. I was in my room when I heard Max barking manically downstairs again. I ran to the balcony and looked down. Under the porch light, I saw him. The same man, the same grin. He was standing right in front of the sliding glass door, one hand calmly trying the handle. The lock clicked, but held firm. He knew we were inside. He was trying to get in. In a surge of rage and absolute fear, I ran into my room and grabbed the shotgun. I went back to the second-floor balcony, which looked directly down on where he stood. "Get out of here!" I yelled, aiming the shotgun at him. He slowly raised his head to look at me. His grin widened. He wasn't afraid. He slowly lifted his hand, and I saw he was holding a small seashell wind chime, the one Sarah had hung on our porch for me. He held it up, letting the shells clink musically in the quiet night. Then he simply dropped it. A small act of violation, but one that felt so personal it was chilling. I stopped thinking. I fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed through the mountains. This time he reacted. He flinched and took a small step back. That's when I made my decision. I ran downstairs and threw open the sliding door. "Get him!" I commanded. I shot out like a black missile, his barks and snarls tearing through the night. I had never seen him so aggressive. The man turned and fled into the forest, with Max hot on his heels. Half an hour later, Max returned, a torn piece of a flannel shirt in his mouth, nothing more. The police came again, noted the dropped wind chime and the footprints, but they couldn't find him. After that night, we never saw the watcher on the ridge again. But the story doesn't end there. 2 years later, I was a college student living in a small dorm room in the city. I was on a video call with Sarah. As I habitually got up to close my window blinds, she asked, "You're still scared, aren't you?" I was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Always." Then I told her the latest news. My parents finally sold the house. They took a loss, but they couldn't stand it anymore. Mom said that even when he was gone, the feeling of being watched never went away. That house was a dream, but my parents had forgotten that every dream has a price. And our price was our peace, stolen forever. We had built a fortress of glass and wood to keep the world out, but in the end, we had only built a perfect cage for ourselves, with a nightmare on the outside looking in. When you were a kid, did you believe your house was an impenetrable fortress? I did. I grew up in an apartment on the 20th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, a fortress in the sky that looked down on the sparkling, safe city. I believed no monster could ever make it all the way up there. But one summer night when I was 12, I learned a terrifying truth. Sometimes the monster doesn't have to climb. Sometimes you're the one who presses the elevator button for it. It was a weekend in July. My parents decided it was time for me to experience a taste of growing up, staying home alone for the night. They had a short trip with friends. My sister Chloe was away at a school camp. That left just me, in my fortress in the sky. For a 12-year-old boy named Alex, that was the definition of heaven. I had the whole apartment, a fridge full of snacks, and most importantly, a gaming PC with League of Legends waiting for me to conquer it. That night, I had planned the perfect feast, pizza and video games. Around 7 in the evening, after a few intense matches, my stomach started to rumble. I picked up the phone and called the Pizza Hub, a popular pizza chain in the city. I ordered a large pepperoni pizza, then went back to the world of online battles. Time flew by, and when the doorbell chimed, I eagerly ran to the door with a $50 bill my dad had left on the table. The delivery guy was a young, skinny man, his arms covered in tattoos. But the thing that caught my attention was his eyes. Lifeless eyes that held an unsettlingly blank stare. He handed me the hot pizza box. As I gave him the money and waited for my change, He didn't look down at his wallet. He glanced over my shoulder, deep into the large apartment. Then he asked a simple question that sent a chill down my spine. "You here alone, kid?" My parents had warned me hundreds of times to be wary of strangers. "My parents are on their way home," I stammered, a clumsy lie. I should have just shaken my head, but I knew he was asking because it was just a little kid answering the door of a large apartment. He didn't smile, just gave a slow nod, handed me the change, and turned away. I quickly slammed the door shut and engaged all the locks. I tried to shake his creepy stare out of my head. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I ate my pizza and watched TV, but its familiar, delicious taste seemed to have vanished. After putting the leftovers in the fridge, I went back to my room, immersing myself in the game to forget my unease. Hours passed. The clock struck 11. As I was focused on a massive team fight, the doorbell chimed again, its familiar electronic melody now sounding shrill in the quiet apartment. My heart leaped. Definitely not my parents. They said they'd be home much later. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. A strange man was standing there. Not the delivery guy from earlier. This man was older, wearing a button-up shirt. "Who is it?" I called out. "Hey kid," the man's voice replied, sounding polite. "I live downstairs. I locked my keys in my apartment, and my wife's out of town. Could I use your phone to call a locksmith?" The classic lie. I've lived here my whole life. I know my neighbors. This man wasn't one of them. I stood frozen, not daring to breathe. "We don't have a phone," I lied. "Please, son, I'm in real trouble here." I decided to stay silent, hoping he would give up and leave, but he didn't. A few seconds later, he banged on the door, a loud bang that made me jump. His voice was no longer polite. It was menacing. "Open the door. I know you're in there alone." How did he know? Then I heard the creak of the fire escape door in the hallway outside. He wasn't leaving. He was lurking out there. I screamed and ran for my life into my parents' bedroom. I locked the door and grabbed the landline phone. I didn't remember my dad's number, but I remembered my mom's. She picked up instantly, her voice cheerful. They were probably at a restaurant. "Mom," I whispered in a panic. "Someone is trying to get into our apartment." Her tone changed immediately. The cheerfulness vanished, replaced by pure tension. "Stay calm, Alex. Where are you? Tell me what's happening." I told her everything. When I mentioned the pizza guy asking if I was home alone, I heard my mom curse softly. She told me to stay put in her room with the door locked tight. She said they were calling the police. She stayed on the line with me. Through the phone, I could hear my dad talking to the police on another line. And then in the middle of that tense moment, I heard a sound, a soft rattling sound coming from the direction of the kitchen balcony. "Mom," I whispered, I think he's climbing onto the balcony." "Alex, listen to me. Hide. Get under the bed now. Don't make a sound." Before I could even reply, I heard it. The most terrifying sound. The sound of the balcony door sliding open. And then, footsteps. The footsteps of a stranger, inside my fortress in the sky. Trembling, I crawled under the bed in my parents' room, still clutching the phone. Through the line, I could hear my mom updating the police. "He's inside the apartment. Hurry!" I lay still, holding my breath. I heard his footsteps outside. He wasn't rushing. He was wandering from the living room into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open, then close. What was he doing? Then the footsteps started down the hallway, towards the bedrooms. Each step on the hardwood floor was like a hammer blow to my chest. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The footsteps stopped. I heard the door to my sister Chloe's room open. He was in there for a few seconds, then came back out. Next was my room. I heard my bedroom door open. My heart stopped. He was in my room. What would he do? After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps sounded in the hallway again, heading straight for my parents' room. Where I was hiding, I saw the shadow of his feet through the gap under the door. He stopped right outside. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then I heard the doorknob turn. Click, clack. The door was locked. He tried again, a few more times, rattling it hopelessly. Then everything went silent. I thought maybe he had given up, but no, knock, knock, knock. He knocked. 3 soft, slow, deliberate knocks. He said nothing, just knocked, as if he knew I was in there and he was savoring my fear. He tried the doorknob one last time, then I heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway and fade away. I stayed there, not daring to move. A few minutes later, my mom's voice came through the phone, telling me the police had arrived. They were outside, but she still told me to stay put until they were inside. I heard the front door being forced open, the sound of multiple people running into the apartment, and a loud voice calling my name. "Alex, police, you're safe now." I crawled out from under the bed, my legs still shaking. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing there. The intruder had escaped through the fire escape when they arrived. When my parents got home, the apartment was filled with police. I had to tell the story all over again. When I finished, my parents took me to my bedroom. At first glance, everything seemed untouched, but then I noticed my Lego Star Wars collection. I had a huge Death Star model with dozens of stormtroopers arranged in perfect defensive formation. But now, one of the stormtroopers had been moved from its post. It was standing alone at the very top of the Death Star, its blaster aimed directly at my bed. Only I would have noticed that change. A silent message meant only for me. That night, my sister Chloe came home. After hearing the story, she didn't say anything, just hugged me tight. The night she slept on the sofa in the living room, saying she would stand guard for her little brother. The next day, my parents took me to the Pizza Hub. My stomach churned at the familiar smell of cheese. The manager said a delivery driver named Jake matched the description, but he had abruptly quit his job that very morning. While my parents argued with him, I sat in the booth, staring outside. Every young man with tattoos who walked by made me jump. The lawyers said we had no evidence. The police said they would investigate, but never called back. Even now, as a grown man, I can never order a pizza for delivery without a knot of dread forming in my stomach. The smell of baking cheese is no longer the smell of joy. It's the smell of fear. And every time my doorbell chimes unexpectedly, for a split second, I am that terrified 12-year-old boy again, hiding under the bed, listening to the footsteps of a stranger walking through my home. My fortress in the sky fell that night, and the shards of that memory can never be put back together again. People often say that your home is your safest refuge. But my most terrifying childhood memory didn't come from a dark forest or a deserted alley. It came from within those familiar walls. It taught me a horrifying lesson. Sometimes, the thing you fear most isn't the one trying to break down the door to get in, but the one that's already inside, patiently waiting for you to notice its presence. My story begins when I was 9 years old in a small house in Louisiana, right on the edge of a vast and mysterious nature preserve. The place was both beautiful and terrifying. By day, it was a lush green world of trees and sluggish waterways. But when night fell, it transformed into a thick, inky blackness filled only with the chorus of frogs and unidentifiable sounds. That night, a tropical storm was rolling in off the coast. My parents had a fundraising dinner in New Orleans and got stranded in the city. "The roads are flooded, Leo," my mom said over the phone, her voice filled with worry. "Dad and I are staying at Aunt Susan's. Will you be okay at home alone?" I, with all the courage of a 9-year-old boy, assured her I would be perfectly fine. In fact, I was a little excited. I had the whole house to myself. My mom gave me a long list of things to do. Lock all the doors, draw the curtains, turn on the porch light. I half listened, already preoccupied with my plan to eat an entire jar of gummy bears and watch cartoons late into the night. I fell asleep on the sofa, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn on my stomach, the TV still murmuring softly. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, the house was silent. The TV had gone into sleep mode, and there was an unusual coldness, not the chill of the air conditioner, but a damp chill as if the night's fog had seeped right into the living room. I shivered, remembered my mom's instructions, and groggily got up to check. The front door, back door, windows, everything was already locked tight, the curtains were drawn, so why was the house so cold? I pressed my hand against the glass, but felt no draft. I figured the storm must have knocked out the heater, and tiredly dragged myself upstairs to my bedroom. My bedroom had a large window that looked directly out over the bayou. Only now did I truly sense the storm's fury. The rain lashed against the glass. The wind howled through the eaves, and every few minutes, a flash of lightning would tear the night apart, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. Though I was exhausted, I couldn't get back to sleep. And as I lay there listening to the symphony of the storm, I began to hear another sound, a creak, like the sound of rotten wood groaning under a heavy weight. Our floors were carpeted, so the sound definitely wasn't coming from my room. It was close, right inside the room. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old house settling in the storm. But the creaking grew louder, more rhythmic, and it sounded nothing like nature. It was unsettling me. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake anymore. It was that sound. I couldn't take it any longer. I sat bolt upright, scanning the dark room. I tried to filter out the sound of the rain and thunder, focusing on the creak. It seemed to be coming from the closet, an old oak wardrobe that my grandfather had left us. Just then, a flash of lightning lit up the room for a moment. Everything was normal. But then my heart stopped. The closet door, the one I was 100% sure I had shut tightly before bed, was now slightly ajar. The room plunged back into darkness. I sat motionless, holding my breath. Something had opened it from the inside. Something was in the room with me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't think. A raw survival instinct took over my body. As quietly as possible, I slipped out of bed, inch by inch, and walked barefoot out of the room, not daring to look back. The 5-meter walk from my bed to the door felt like a 1,000-mile journey. I didn't dare stay upstairs. I ran down to the ground floor and squeezed myself under the heavy oak dining table, the darkest, most hidden place I could find. And only when I was curled up in that hidden corner did I begin to cry, silent, choked sobs. Someone was in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away. I don't know how long I stayed under the table, but then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were uneven, stumbling, occasionally punctuated by a heavy thud as if something had jumped, then dragged itself. The footsteps got closer. They were heading towards the dining room where I was hiding. I clamped my hand over my mouth, trying to become invisible. And then I saw them through the gap between the floor and the tablecloth. I couldn't see the upper body, only 2 legs. 2 bare, unnaturally long and gaunt legs. They were caked in wet mud and had a sickly, pale yellow color. The skin was rough and covered in a crisscross of scratches, as if it had just pushed through a thorny bush. They moved with difficulty, trembling, as if struggling just to stay upright. Just when I thought nothing could be more horrifying, the thing dropped an object from its hand. Thud. A heavy, dull sound. A river stone as large as a fist, dark, smooth, and polished, rolled to a stop on the floor. If it bent down to pick it up, it would definitely see me. I stared wide-eyed at the stone lying less than a meter from my face, but the creature didn't bend down. It just stood still, its muddy yellow legs motionless. A silent standoff, where any move from me could be the end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it continued to walk. I couldn't see the legs anymore. I heard its chaotic footsteps wander around the first floor, and then finally, the sound of the front door opening and slamming shut. It was gone. I stayed under that table for a long time after that, trembling in a state of shock. Finally, as dawn approached, I dared to crawl out. The first thing I did was pick up the river stone. I didn't want my parents to see it and ask questions. I hid it deep inside my toy chest. The next morning, I walked around the house. The front door was locked, but the chain lock was undone. And when I went into the kitchen, I saw them. Wet, muddy tracks on the tile floor. But they weren't human footprints. They were long and narrow, with no distinct toes, looking almost like the webbed tracks of a large bird. The mud left behind had bits of green algae and reeds in it. I quickly wiped them clean. But when I returned to my bedroom, a final horror was waiting. The closet door was shut tight, but on my pillow where my head had been lay a single cattail reed soaking wet and muddy. It had been there, right next to me while I slept. A few weeks later, my family was having a barbecue in the backyard. My dad put his arm around my shoulder and said to everyone, "This kid Leo is a brave one, stayed home alone through a big storm like that and was totally fine." I just forced a smile. My eyes unconsciously drifted to the edge of the yard, where the swamp began. I had the feeling that someone was standing in the thicket of trees watching us. I shivered, and from then on, the barbecue wasn't fun anymore. Now, I'm a grown man. I never told anyone the full story, but that night left invisible scars. I have a fear of still water, especially dark, murky ponds. The sound of a heavy, smooth object dropping on a hard floor still makes my blood run cold for a second. And most importantly, to this day, before I go to sleep, I always have a ritual. I don't just lock my bedroom door, I also prop a heavy chair under the handle of my closet. I know it's irrational, but I can't help it, because I know that some things come from the swamp, and they don't need the front door to get into your house. Sometimes, all they need is a closet that wasn't shut tightly enough.